Hello, my name is Noel Manning. I am the YL Assessment Consultant with the Wyoming Department of Education. And we have a couple of people here with us from the WDE just to participate in this training as well. So I'll introduce them first and then get right into our topic. We have Rebecca Valacana, who is our Wyoming Department of Education Assessment Supervisor. And also joining us is Michelle Carroll, who is another assessment consultant with the WDE. She particularly focuses on ACT, but she's always here to help support in any way she can. And again, my name is Noel Manning. Today we are talking about the WDE SARE system, and this is the system we use for exemptions and exceptional accommodations for any state testing system that we will run throughout any given school year. So just some really basic information to start us off with first, and that is whenever we're talking about the Wyoming state assessment system, we must remember that all Wyoming students are expected to participate in the Wyoming assessment system. And the SARE system is used to create state assessment requests for multiple state assessment systems in particular cases where there might be a difficulty encumbrance that a student might face when either taking YTOP, YALT, WIDA access, or ALT access. And those last two, the WIDA access and ALT access, are for EL students. So I'm going to walk us through the three different elements of the SARE system and how to incorporate, how to submit a request for a student if they fall into one of these categories where they might need a special situation for one of these tests. So when it comes to the actual state assessment request, I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but a state assessment request is submitted via the SARE system by a Wyoming school or district when a student has a particular hardship or exceptional circumstances that might affect their performance on one of those state assessments. The WDE will review when each one of these requests is submitted and then either approve or deny the request. If it's approved, that's fairly straightforward. If the request is denied, we will give information as to why it's been denied with the hopes that if this is truly a request that is needed by a student, that additional information can be presented to us in order to hopefully allow this request to go through. So we're trying to do as much as we can to support the students as long as it is fair for each of our assessment systems. And there are three main types of requests that can be made in the SARE system. One is exemptions, the other is exceptional accommodations, and the third is specific just to access and alt access, and that is called domain exemptions. So I'm going to go through each one of those and talk about the particular circumstances that might lead to a request for a student. This is actually what the SARE system looks like once you've signed in. If you note at the upper right-hand corner, there's a blue sign-in button. Using the SARE system does require a YED Pro account. Usually, district administrators, principals, etc., will have access to this. If they do not, I don't believe I have a screenshot of this particular case, but clicking the sign in button will actually give you the ability to, there's a new link for a request for access. So that is something that you can pursue if you need access, but you don't quite have it. So we'll start with exemption. Now, exemptions or exemption requests are applicable to all state assessment systems. So again, YTOP, YALT, access, and alt access. And these exemption requests submissions can begin as early as January 15th of a given school year. So in this case, we're about a month away from any of these exemptions coming, as we haven't really opened up any of these assessments yet. Access is coming soon in January in alt access. So the exemption criteria, there's three major cases for when a student could actually be considered for one of these requests. The first would be that the student is expelled for the entire assessment window. The second is the student is placed or resides out of state for the entire assessment window. And the third is that the student is an EL student who's been enrolled in a U.S. school for less than 1 year. And again, this is, or this particular case is only for YTOP and YL testing. All EL students should be obvious, must be EL tested annually. However, the WDE does acknowledge the fact that if a EL student has just moved into the United States and has been a student for less than 1 year, they might have some difficulty, particularly with the English reading and or writing test for YTOP or YALT. School administrators are only able to apply for exemption requests on behalf of a student, so just something to keep in mind. If there is an exemption that you wish to pursue, you might need to involve a school administrator if you have the responsibility for setting up testing for your students, but don't necessarily have that role. In addition to meeting at least one of the exemption criteria, there is required information or documentation that must be submitted when making one of these exemption requests. So for example, all of this information, the student name, the grade, the WISER ID, the date of birth, the name of the assessment for exemption, the type of exemption, the begin and end dates. So for example, if a student has been expelled or they're out of state placement, we need those particular dates of when that happened to make sure that they line up with the testing windows. Date of initial identification of EL student for those particular exemptions that are directly related to EL students who have been in the US for less than 1 year. And then uploaded documentation. And if you go to the SAYER site, there are actually examples of these, but we would need your student information system. Screenshots usually work best. But proof of showing student has been expelled and the re-enrollment dates or proof of out-of-state placement address or out-of-state placement letter, or in the case again of EL status students only, proof of EL status and the year of entrance into the US. And again, really all that's necessary for this is a screenshot, a simple screenshot from your student information system. And that can easily be uploaded into the system. I apologize. I don't remember that being there, but someone changed the order. I'm going to skip over that one. When you log into the SAYER system and go towards the exemption request, you will see this screen. Again, it gives you the example criteria down below on the left-hand side. You can click on the Learn More link under required documentation. It will give you some examples, just in case you're not sure about what you need to upload. And then finally, when you are ready to actually put the request in to submit, you click the blue submit button on the far right side, and that will give you what these screens look like. And I tried to make this as minimal as possible in terms of the length of the presentation, so I apologize. But the front image is simply what you're greeted with. In this particular case, this is for an expelled student, the fields that you'll have to fill in. You can also see a list of, when you first log in, any exemptions you've already applied for any students. That is the screenshot in the background. This next slide gives us what the exemption form looks like for an English learner student. Once that's been selected, about the middle of the screenshot. And then finally, here's a screenshot for an out-of-state placement. It is fairly easy to go through this process. And again, there are screenshots on the SAYER page that can help you. But if you ever run into any difficulty, you can certainly reach out to the assessment team. We'd be happy to help you out with this. And our email addresses will be at the end of the presentation. The next is exceptional accommodations, the second of the three types. Before I go on, are there any questions in particular about the exemption process? Okay, so exceptional accommodations are applicable to the YTOP summative, the YALT, the access or alt access assessment, and any requests for exceptional accommodations may begin September 3rd. So we're past that date. There are some particular pieces of information to keep in mind. So a good example of an exceptional accommodation, it's provided to a student whose IEP or 504 indicates that the student needs supports that are not already addressed in manuals like the YTOP and the YALT guidance for accessibility and accommodations, or the WIDA accessibility and accommodations manual. A good example is perhaps large print. copies of tests that might be needed to be ordered for students. Another common example we have is Braille. However, we need to keep in mind that when we're ordering these items, the sooner the better, especially for something like Braille, because of the length of time it can take for the assessment vendor to create those. And so, Becca, I actually should have included this in my presentation. Do you remember what is the cutoff date for ordering Braille books?
October 1st is usually the cutoff date. We have some wiggle room if someone comes in late,
Yep.
and we can rush order it, but October 1st is when we need it so we can start developing all of the forms.
Thank you. I'll add that to the slideshow after the fact. But so that is why the window opens so quickly, especially because, again, we need extra time to get some of those actual printed materials printed. Now, if an IEP team or a 504 plan determines that a student's need for an exceptional accommodation, the assessment and building coordinator, or the BC, for YTOP or WILD and or for WIDA access must submit the request. And then the exceptional accommodation, if approved again by the WDE, in this case is valid from the date of approval through June 30th of that year. So an important thing to keep in mind is such an exceptional accommodation that a student will require on any of these tests on an annual basis must be updated annually. So it's a good idea to keep track of the student's use of that accommodation, whether or not it continues to provide the student with the success they need for this particular assessment that you're applying for, and that it's not just a one and done kind of situation. When you log into SARE to submit an exceptional accommodation, again, there is required information, documentation to be submitted. A lot of this is what I've already spoken about for the exception request. However, student name, grade, WISER ID, date of birth, description of the accommodation that the student needs that is not already built into the testing platform that this is being requested for. The number of months the student has had the accommodation in place already. The WD is really looking for evidence that the student has been using this in the past, and that actually is helping them be successful in the test. An explanation or details of the accommodation and for which assessments. And then just a reminder, and there are warnings about this, but please do not attempt to upload either an entire document or a screenshot of an IEP or a 504 plan. We do not need that. In fact, that would be a violation really of student privacy. And so an explanation, the details, the number of months the accommodation has been put into place will suffice. We trust districts. We like to place our trust into districts, but we do ask that they go through this process so we have a record of these requests. And then we do, again, go through and approve them on a case-by-case basis. For any paper-based exceptional accommodations, Braille large print, submissions must be submitted for each student via SARE as well as ordered in Tide. So that's a little bit different than in years past, but please just remember, if you need a printed material, not only do we ask that you submit a SARE request for our records, but you also need to put that request in through Tide so that the, in this case, the assessment vendor for YTOP or WILD knows and can produce and then send those to you. This is a particular page that you would see if you're going into SARE to submit an exceptional accommodation request. Just like before with the exception request, it does give you a little information about the required documentation. I might have cut the screenshot off a little bit, but there should be examples again of how to fill out this form, as well as again over on the right bottom hand side, the actual button to create a request to submit. Once you go into the system, again, the screenshot in the background will give you a list of any accommodations, exceptional accommodations you've already requested. And clicking on the blue Add Accommodation button will give you the screenshot in the foreground, which actually gives us just the fields that you need to fill out to submit one of these exceptional accommodations. And this is just a close-up. If you note here, a little bit below where the student name, selected grade, etc. is, there's the accommodation box where you would select add new record. And that's just a blown up version of the window that appears there where you type in information about the accommodation and how long the student has actually been using the accommodation. Our last of the three topics is our access and alt access domain exemptions. But again, before I go on, are there any questions about exceptional accommodations? Okay. So access and alt access domain exemptions, these in particular only obviously relate to the access and alt access tests for EL students, the WIDA access test. And domain exemptions are applicable. Well, I just said that submissions are due beginning, or I'm sorry, are not due, but can be submitted beginning September 1st of each year. Now, domain exemptions are available to students whose IEP or 504 plan indicates that the student's needs make it unable for them to access one or more of the 4 domains tested with access testing, even when the allowable accommodations that WIDA has given us are in place. So the 4 domains for access or alt access are listening, speaking, reading, or writing. If a IEP team or a 504 plan determines that a student needs one or more domain exemptions, the assessment building coordinator, BC, for YTOP, YALT, or in this particular case, WIDA access, sometimes it's the same person, sometimes it's somebody else, they must actually submit the request. And like before, with exceptional accommodations, the domain exemptions, if approved, are valid from the date of approval through June 30th of the school year. Each year, a request must be submitted annually. So again, we want to make sure that districts are doing their due diligence and making sure that if there's an IEP or 504 plan that indicates a student might not be able to take one of these domains based on their disability, that they're annually checking to make sure that this is still something that the student is dealing with, so that we're not putting undue circumstances on them when they take, in this case, the access or alt access test. Again, there's required information like all of the other requests, very similar, slight variations. We do need information on the submitter, their name, their email address, their phone number. In most cases, sometimes this is a little bit more of a nuanced process, and so we might need to contact the individual directly to make sure we have the correct information or to ask any other questions about what we can do to support the student. Student name, date of birth, WISER ID, gender, the selection of primary disability or disabilities, and I will show you in a minute. There is a checklist of permissible options corresponding to the access domains. So we have to be very mindful of these domain exemption requests based on particular disabilities that a student might encounter. The selection of domains, in this case, that this is particularly pertaining to, of what you would be asking for the exemption for. An IEP or a 504 verification, it's just a true or false question. Is this something that is verified, or is this something that is written in the IEP or the 504? And then a reason text field, so a description of the disabilities requiring the domain exemption that's being requested. This is the screenshot of what the SARE system looks like when you click on the domain exemptions for access and alt access. Again, there is information about it, including required information. This one has an after submission piece that explains what should happen once a submission is requested, once a submission is submitted. And then the button, again, as usual, in the bottom right-hand corner to submit your exemption request, so actually to start the process. And then if we look at these screenshots, again, in the background, we will always start, once you click that submit button, with a list of any domain exemptions that have already been submitted for your district. And if there are none, it doesn't matter. But if you are putting in a particular domain exemption request, you're going to click on the blue Add Access Domain Exemption button, and then this screenshot in the foreground will pop up, which gives you the information or gives you the fields to fill out. Notice the checklist that I referenced before about the particular disabilities that the student might be afflicted with that could impact their ability to take the access or the alt access test, as well as the other fields that I described previously, and really how to complete this request, and then the submission button at the very bottom. That is basically it about the three. Before I go any further, I do see that there are a couple of chats that have appeared. Are there any questions about domain exemptions? Becca's shaking her head no.
Nope, it looks like we're good. I will just state, Tyler's been very good about telling us he does not have any questions, so that's good. I will just state, just so that we have it out there, for the access domain exemptions, it's important to note that a student cannot be exempt from all 4 domains of tests. That would be a standard assessment exemption that falls under only those 3 categories that I mentioned before, and only 2 of them are relevant to the access test. But we have had some of those in the past that we've had to work through with districts. We have seen 1 and 2 domains be logically needing exemptions due to the lack of accommodations and just the type of assessment. But usually it's just the 1 or 2.
Thank you. Okay, so I believe this is the second to last slide here, and this is just a list of resources, and really there's only one, and that's the direct link to the SAYER system. For those that don't have immediate access to this PowerPoint, this presentation, however, the SAYER system can also be accessed on various assessment pages found on the WDE District Resources website. Remember, the WDE District Resources website does require a login. And then, as well as I mentioned before, to actually use the SAYER system, you also need the WIAD Pro account. I believe is the District Resources website, is that login also WIAD Pro?
It is. They are different levels. So districts, WISE coordinators set those, and you can access the resource site with a basic WIAD Pro account, and you must have assessment coordinator or English learner coordinator access in order to get to the SAYER permissions.
Thank you, Becca. And like I said at the beginning of the presentation, there is that need access. Click here for more information. Link down below on the screenshot here. Oops, did it again. So if you need that access, try to use that link. You can speak with an individual within your district, or please reach out to the WDE if you're just not able to get in, and we will help you as best we can. And then finally, one last slide that just asks if there are any questions regarding the SAYER system.